Hi there. I welcome you to our virtual teaching for today. Today we have a very interesting topic at hand for us to discuss today. But before I move on to today's topic, I would like to remind you that the various lessons have been grouped according to my playlist into SHS1 lessons, SHS2 lessons, SHS3 lessons, and therefore if you happen to be confused about what to do, you can just go to the playlist and you are going to get for yourself lessons specifically made for the various levels or classes. So you subscribe to the channel and also share to your friends in other schools. Today we are going to look at the transatlantic slave trade, and this has been one of the most important and famous topics in the history of Africa and of course the history of the world at large. Specifically, we are going to look at the origin of the transatlantic slave trade. So where did this trade come from? How did it start? How did it begin? And that is going to be our focus on for today. So let's look at our lesson objectives for today. So by the end of this lesson, I expect you to be able to explain the meaning of the transatlantic slave trade. What do we mean by transatlantic slave trade? Again, I also expect you to be able to discuss some of the origin of the transatlantic slave trade. So the origin, where did it start? How did it start? So you should be able to discuss some, of course, issues with regards to the origin of the trade. So let's move on to our introduction. And so what do we mean by transatlantic slave trade? The transatlantic slave trade referred to the forced transportation of enslaved Negro Africans from their homelands in Africa to areas like the Americas, Caribbean islands around the 15th through to the 19th century. So basically, when we talk about the transatlantic slave trade, we are referring to the forced transportation of Negro Africans, that's black Africans, from this area, this continent, to the Caribbeans. And this is where we refer to as the Caribbean islands. And then we have the Americas. So the whole of this is referred to as the Americas. And so here is what we refer to, here is what we refer to as the Americas. So this is North America, and then this is South America. And so basically, slaves or Negro Africans were forcibly taken from this area and transported to Latin America or South America, the Caribbean, and then to the North Americans, where we have USA and Canada today. Now, the slave consignment were usually taken across the Middle Passage, and this is the Atlantic Ocean. Hence, we came to call the trade transatlantic slave trade, because the slaves were actually taken from, the slaves were actually transported across the across the transatlantic across the Atlantic Ocean. So the slaves were carried across the Atlantic Ocean, and hence we call it the transatlantic slave trade. And that area is what we refer to as the Middle Passage. So when you're asked in your exams, what do we mean by the Middle Passage, we are actually referring to the transportation of the enslaved Africans across the Atlantic Ocean. And this is what we mean by the Atlantic Ocean. When you look at the map, you'll see some part labeled as Atlantic Ocean. Good. Now, this trade began in the 16th century and then also progressed through until it was eventually suppressed in the 19th century when finally slave trade came to an end. So let's move on to the origin of the trade. Now that we know the meaning as to the meaning of the trade, let's then look at the origin of the trade. How did the trade begin? Who started it? Now, it is agreed among historians that the Portuguese were the first European people to actually begin with the slave trade, or the transatlantic slave trade. And this was so because around 1441, a Portuguese explorer known as Antoine Gonçalves returned to Lisbon with a party of 10 African slaves whom he presented to Prince Henry. Now, Prince Henry hoped to, convert these people, or these 10 Africans, Negro Africans, to Christianity, and more so educate the most talented among them, and then send them back to Africa as missionaries. And we can all agree that one of the reasons for the coming of the Europeans was actually to Christianize the Africans, and therefore, if Prince Henry hoped to convert these 10 Africans to Christianity and send them back to their homeland to help in the Christianization of the African, I think it was in the right direction. However, this was not achieved. Prince Henry could not achieve this target, and so by the time he died, almost around 1460, between 700 and 800 slaves were being exported annually to Portugal. So by the time he died, around 1460, about 700 to 800 slaves were exported to Portugal annually. So the various kings who came after him, continued with the exportation of slaves, or Africans to the Caribbean. And that explains why we are saying that Portugal might be the first African country, the first European nation to actually begin with the transatlantic slave trade. Now, so this was how the first Africans were actually transported from their homelands to Europe. So now we've not come to the Americas and the Caribbean. So let's look at how did the trade, how did they get to the Americas? What happened? Now, Spain, began to explore North and South America. That's North America and Latin America, to be precise, between 1492 and 1504. And they began to establish plantations in these areas and also exploited the mineral resources in the Americas, or in the North and South America. And it will surprise you that if you look at South America, for instance, all the countries in there, with the exception of Brazil, all the others, Venezuela, Chile, Peru, Paraguay, all of them, Mexico, all of them were actually colonized by Spain. So all those areas were for the Spanish, and therefore they needed labor, to work in these plantations and to exploit the mineral resources that they had actually found in these areas. But the local people that the Spanish were using to do that work, could not match up with the task, because the work was so intense that the local people could not actually provide labor for the Spanish. And so Spain then decided to rely on Portugal for African slaves. And so they signed a treaty called the Asiento Treaty, which allowed Portugal to supply slaves to Spanish colonies. And so through Spain, the first batch of Africans now came to the to the Americas through Spain. And it was not until 20 years later that now slaves were now directly imported from the African lands to the Caribbean. So the first batch of Africans exported to the Americas in about 1500, in about 1501, was sent from Lisbon. So like I have already indicated, the first batch of Africans that came to the Americas were actually from Spain. Were actually from Portugal. And so after 20 years later, then Spain and other European countries decided to directly now transport Africans from Africa to the Caribbean directly. Now, most of these slaves were exported between the regions of modern-day Ghana, which we refer to as the Gold Coast. So over here, you can see a Gold Coast over here, and then of course the Cameroons around this area. And so the area between, of course, Ghana and Cameroon, the coastline, were actually referred to as the slave coast, because slaves were actually acquired from those areas, and then also others were also taken from Angola and Congo. So when you look at this map, this is the current map, and this is where the slaves were actually acquired through in the African continent. From here they were taken straight to the Americas, and this is a very old colonial map that you see the Negro land, the Guinea, the slave coast, everything over here. Now, the slaves from Ghana were known in the Americas as, or in the West Indies, as the Coromantine Negroes, and they were considered as the most courageous and stubborn slaves among all the slaves, especially those that were in Ghana, and they were the ones who were running away and engaging in all sort of rebellion act. Good. So today we have learned something important. We've known the meaning of the transatlantic slave trade. We are saying that it was the forced transportation of Africans or enslaved Africans or Negroes from their homeland to the Americas and to the Caribbean. And of course, we've also looked at the origin of the trade, and we have established that historians believe that it was Portugal who first began to export slaves from Africa to Europe, and later Spain then requested for these slaves in the Asiento Treaty, and then the first batch of slaves were then taken from Portugal to Spain. And after 20 years later, Spain and other European countries now decided to import slaves directly from the African continent to the Caribbean island. We've also established that the slaves were actually acquired between Ghana and Cameroon, and that's the coastline. That coastline area was what we refer to as the slave coast, and the most courageous and stubborn slaves were actually the ones from Ghana, known as the Coromantine Negroes. Good. Thank you, and I wish you to subscribe to the channel, as you have seen over there, and then also share it with your friends. We shall meet some other time. Bye.